Hey, Bubba.
Hey, dude.
How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Well, man, I'm from Nashville. I lived here my whole life. My parents moved here when I was 10 months old. So originally I was born in Arkansas, and my parents moved here, and my parents were both working musicians. Actually, my three of my dad and my stepdad are both guitar players, and my mom is a session singer and was also a writer. She is a writer, I should say, but she had a publishing deal with Curb Magnetone in the '90s for like 6 years or so. Did that. So man, I just kind of grew up around it, dude. Family business and all that. I was on tour buses when I was, you know, a year old. And just kind of came by it honestly. I was kind of joke and say that I'm glad am kind of okay at playing guitar because I have no other skills.
I relate to that, man, for sure. It's just interesting to think about your first musical memories of like, do you remember, was it hearing a record or seeing a live band or what was it that was like, all right, I gotta learn the guitar. Like, why the guitar? It could have been drums. It could have been all these other things.
You're right. It could have been anything. There's a two-part answer.
Okay.
One, I came around really late. I didn't start playing guitar till I was like 17. I don't know if a lot of people can relate to this, but I think there's a certain inherent nature that you just don't think your parents what they do is cool. Of anything.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't ever wooed by the music as a profession. And the other thing too, I hear a common story told of people that say, or like yourself, especially if they grew up in a church environment where music was a thing, but they'll say things like, well, my mom and dad weren't musical, but they loved music. And we always had like old Waylon Jennings records played in the house, or they would play the Beatles in the house or whatever. That was definitely not my experience. Like work in my house was a job, right? So like when we didn't listen to music recreationally in the Wells home, it was, if they were listening to music, it was stuff they had to learn or work on. It was artists that they worked for music, or and I mean occasionally in the car, but that just wasn't the vibe. There was no let's all gather around the record player when I was growing up as a kid. Really how I got into it was my cousin played drums, and he wanted to have a band. So when we were I was like a senior in high school, and just kind of on a whim, and I picked guitar because we had guitars laying around the house. I mean, it was as simple as that. It was like that was the instrument laying around, and I was like, yeah, I'll get one of Dad's guitars, and I'll play, and then it was still, very much just a hobby. It wasn't until I was, 18 or 19 when like the bug really hit me. Like, when
Sure.
it once it sunk, the hook sunk deep, and then I went way into it, and just dropped everything else, and that's kind of when the 10,000 hours period started.
Love that you mentioned the 10,000 hours. And I actually love that considering your success from an early age, you saw music being treated like a business and treated like a job, which I feel like if you want to make it your job is super important. You got to treat it like a business. So,
Yeah.
you, I guess, had good examples of that from such a young age. Like if you're going to do this, if you're going to be for real about it, it's going to take an everyday commitment.
Well, yeah, and I tell people all the time, one advantage I have or had growing up that way, because even my parents' friends, like a lot of their friends, most of their friends were also in the business. They were other touring people, or other writers or other singers, or most people, if they didn't grow up in Nashville or New York and LA, their understanding of kind of what it is to make music for a living may be a little skewed, or at the best maybe just uninformed. And they know how making music was with their friends in their garage, and then they have to move here and kind of realize, oh, no, 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 there's all these other steps and all these other things you have to do to kind of, like you said, like monetize it, essentially, for lack of a better word. And the second thing too, most people, the classic story is, they were the best keyboard player in their town, and then they came here, and you realize really quickly in Nashville that the bar is in a different place than people that don't live in Nashville think it is. So for me, where I was really lucky is that, yeah, one, I was surrounded by people from an early age that like took it seriously and treated it as a job. And two, even when I started, I had a very real understanding of how good everybody was and how good I needed to be before I, could even be considered for a job, playing for, there was none of that. I was the best guitar player in my town. My entire life, I've never been the best guitar player in my town because I grew up here. So it's, I didn't have to kind of learn that lesson. It was laid out for me really early on.
Even at an early age in your career, you knew you needed an edge. You needed to stand out in a certain way, and that comes through the 10,000 hours. But I'm sure, and as we'll learn through this interview, it comes through kind of honing in on your tone or the thing that you bring to a session that's different than the other guy. And that's something I'm interested in, how that developed. But before we get into that, it's like, how do you develop from a 17-year-old starting a rock band, I'm assuming, or something like that, and then
Yeah, right. Yeah.
into like something for real, like, no, I got to make this for real. I'm going to go in the country market. Or was it even that thought? Or when did you switch gears from garage band to pro?
Yeah, well, the gear switched when I realized that traditional college wasn't going to be a route for me, and it was kind of simultaneously like, I was a freshman in college, and I wasn't really doing well there, and at the same time, the kind of hook had gotten me, the bug had got me for guitar, and so I kind of found myself going, oh, okay, this isn't working well for me, and I don't feel, like this is a path, and at the same time, this other interest was really blossoming and really, it was just something, passion is the word at the time. I mean, I would just eat, sleep, and breathe it. I just didn't do anything. If I had free time, I was playing guitar, just period. Possibly an oversimplification, but my logic at the time was like, well, look, I don't get sick of doing this. I love this. I'm crazy about it. I want to learn more about it and get better at it. So why don't try to make this my job? And, my parents, God bless them, they were like, this is a horrible idea. They were like, you're starting too late. You don't just make this choice when you're, 18 or, and in their defense, I think their fear came from an idea that, okay, Derek's maybe floundering a little bit and college isn't really going well for him. And now he thinks he can do music because it's easy, or like he can do that because we're in it or whatever.
Right.
And it was really the opposite. I definitely, again, had a very real understanding of how good they were versus how good I was, and I didn't want to embarrass myself, and I certainly didn't want to embarrass them either. And so, kind of from that moment, initially, I didn't even try to put myself out there as a working musician. I got a job waiting tables, and I was waiting tables. And all I did for, the next 18 months was, I was fortunate enough, I got to move back into my pop's house, and I lived in his basement, and I stayed in that basement and I waited tables. And if I wasn't waiting tables, I was at home learning albums, and I would just started learning records. And I knew, that, obviously in Nashville, country music was going to be the biggest, path to making a living. I felt like touring made sense for me because I was young. And so, man, I just started consuming country albums just like, crazy. So I would go to Walmart and I'd go buy like 2 records every week. And I would go buy like an old classic country record, like Waylon Jennings' Greatest Hits or something like that, or Lonesome Henri Amin, but Merle Haggard or whatever. And then I would buy like a contemporary, either contemporary country record or like a contemporary, rock pop record, something that was modern. And I would just learn those cover to cover. I started picking up the concept of charting, the Nashville number system. My parents kind of had stepped in and said, all right, if you're serious about this, you need to go get this book. It's called the Nashville number system. You need to learn how to do this. So yeah, that 18-month period, I did nothing but work on, playing, learning albums, learning to chart. I spent all my money on, gear, one piece at a time. I'd save up enough money to go buy a new pedal, and I'd go buy a pedal. do that sort of thing, a couple of pieces fell in place for me, and I was able to kind of finally start putting myself out there and getting a little work as a guitar player. But that whole period of time, I was just practicing, waiting tables and practicing.
Dude, I relate to that because even as a kid growing up in Blanchard, Louisiana, I was going to Walmart buying all these Paisley albums. Really, I was trying to learn guitar or Keith albums, and
Yeah.
and learn by ear as best as I could. But for me, I didn't have a perception of what Nashville offered. So I guess you kind of seeing the options as a guitar player. Did you know when you first started out, I want to be a road guy or I want to be a session musician? Like, when you were buying these albums and you were like woodshedding on these licks, really just learning them, were you preparing for the road, or were you knowing like, no, I'm gonna produce records, I'm gonna be in the studio?
Man, I'd be lying if I said I had that much foresight.
Yeah.
At that period of time, as an 18, 19-year-old kid, I just wanted to find a way to make a living playing guitar.
Yeah.
And to me, again, in my field of vision, and having seen what my parents did, and they had been primarily touring musicians their whole life, so I kind of thought, okay, well, this makes sense. I can meet people this way, and I could, or I can meet people out and have chances or options, or get opportunities to audition or whatever. And so initially I just wanted to get good enough to go win a gig. That was the whole, I just get good enough, learn enough records, learn enough stuff that I could get good enough to go audition for a gig and get it, and that was the whole thing. And then when I kind of finally got a good gig, when I started playing for Josh Turner, I ended up being with Josh for 5 years. And when I was with Josh, even after I got that gig, I look back in hindsight, and I was probably just barely good enough to get that gig. I think it was a combination of I could learn the record, really, really well and play that confidently. And Josh and the team really liked me just as a person. So even the first, almost 2 years of being with Josh, it was still kind of laser focus on just getting better and playing Josh's music even better than I was, and just trying to kind of perpetually like become a better musician. And because also too, I was just like wanted to keep my gig, right? Got a gig, now I want to keep the gig, right? I would say about the second year of that job, being with him, I kind of looked up one day and thought, okay, I'm doing this gig pretty well. There's some job security here. This all feels, really good. What's the next move? Do I want to be doing this, for another 20 years, or is there something else, or would there be another artist I want to go play for? And that's when the wheels kind of started spinning there. And then ultimately it was, the reverence that my parents had always had for all the studio musicians, that I just kind of said, yeah, man, I think I want to do that. Like it's like if you go use sports analogies or whatever, it's like if you decide you want to go be a major league baseball player or whatever, it's like you want to play for the Yankees, or or if it's, if you want to play football, you want to go play for the Patriots or whatever, whoever your team is. And in my mind, that the way my parents had always kind of spoke and talk about studio and recording, combined with the, hours and years I had spent looking through album liner notes, learning these guys' parts, reading the name Kenny Greenberg and learning his Brent Mason and learning his part, JT Cornfly, and doing all that. That was like, okay, I think I want to go try to do that. I don't know if I can, but I think I want to try to kind of make that move. So that was kind of when the field of vision started to kind of shift a little bit for me.
Well, you're more inspired by your heroes. Like, if they can do that, I'm gonna just learn it. I'm gonna put in the hours and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna bring the value to that session and the different tone or whatever that is. What do you feel like gave you your edge as far as starting to really get session work? I mean, there had to be something that a certain thing that you started doing, or maybe it was just putting in extra time on your sessions, or what was it that you felt like opened doors for you?
You know, I mean, I've joked a lot that I could, you know, I mean, it's not a joke. I've told this story before, but, you know, I mean, I can trace my entire session career back to one session, you know, truly. But if I go back in even further, you know, one, I was extraordinarily lucky to have a good, solid, stable job with Josh. And again, after, you know, the first couple years when I kind of started wanting to do sessions, I had three good years out there with him where, you know, I was always going to have money in the bank account. And when we weren't touring, I had such an interest in recording that I would jump at any chance to go record anyone, anywhere for nothing, you know, for anything. You know, you jump at those things, and a lot of it was just kind of janky bedroom recording. And let me be clear, this was like early 2000s, you know, the inbox was like the peak of technology at that point, right? We didn't have, like, you know, it wasn't like it is now. Things like Kempers and aux boxes didn't exist for electric guitar players.
Yep.
And, you know, preamp technology had not come, you know, so it was like, you know, driving to this guy's house over near Opryland and playing acoustics, you know, for $35 a song on his weird record he was making, and being there for 10 hours, you know. And but I just took each as an opportunity to learn, you know, and get used to hearing myself in the headphones, and you know, just figuring out things. And those days are tough. You know, the early days of a session player can really make you question some things, because when you go through session ghetto, the caliber of the song is generally not as great as you would expect, right?
Yep.
And it's hard to be creative and be inspired by that kind of stuff, right? And you know, so you go, you know, you listen to a Keith Urban record and you go, oh man, that's amazing, I want to do that. And you feel like so inspired and creative. And then the reality of what some of these kind of low ball, you know, albeit honest, good people, these kinds of scenarios, when you're first breaking into recording it, you go, why can't I think of anything cool to play? Or why does this feel weird? Or why is this foreign? Or what is the deal here? And, you know, it took years to kind of, by comparison, slowly but surely kind of realize, like, oh, like once I started getting on some good sessions with good players and really good engineers, and then I'd kind of circle back to some of these things that I had been doing as a quote unquote learning experience, you're like, oh, no, I'm okay, actually. Like I can come up with cool stuff. These songs are terrible. and when I'm in a situation, you know, basically when I'm in a situation where I'm set up for success, somehow that seems easier to succeed there. And you learn, you know, those lessons along the way. But yeah, essentially, you know, it got to a point where a songwriter that I had met kind of got a new publishing deal. She asked me if I wanted to come play on her demo session. You know, I remember the studio, the engineer. I can tell you every person that was in the band on that session. A lot of them I still see or work with to this day. And you know, that one session, I kind of proved myself, and it went well. And then she hired me to do the next one a month later. And then at that session, the acoustic player asked for my name and number. You know, he knew my name, but let me get your number. I got something else I'd like to get you on. And just brick by brick, you know, you begin to kind of cobble together this network of people that hire you, you know, and it just all, you know, grew from there.
How did it come together from the time that you started, I guess, wanting to do sessions? Okay, I'm going to start playing on these lesser than greater songs, to
Yeah.
the moment that you felt like, oh man, okay, this is it. It's starting to happen now. I'm getting in the right sessions. I'm getting with the right players. And it is a word of mouth business, as we all know. But how long did it take for you to get to that breakthrough?
It's hard for me to quantify, and I think I share the sentiment with a lot of guys that I'm around, at least, in that I don't know that you ever feel like you made it. I mean, I still don't. There's obviously certain milestones that you have to just acknowledge, and it's cool to, you know, when you're on something that's successful or you play on a number one or whatever, it's nice. It's nice, and you definitely are. There's moments for pause, I'll say. Um, but that's one of the challenges I would say psychologically about session world, is that there gets this middle ground where you're right on the precipice of maybe playing on some stuff that's going to be impactful or going to be has the potential to be really big, but none of it's out yet, and no one's going to know the name if you say it to somebody. And there was definitely a good period of time there in the middle where I think, friends and family were looking at me going, God, man, is he going to be able to do this? I don't know if this is going to work out. But from my vantage point, I knew the caliber of musicians that I was playing on. I saw myself I'm on these sessions and I'm the only guy in the room that hasn't played on a number one or multiple number ones or whatever. And so for me, I took a lot of hope, I guess I'll say, or a lot of assurance in the fact that I felt myself being in these rooms more and more often of really high caliber people or songwriters. It's like, okay, everyone in this room's play on hit songs. This songwriter's written 6 number ones. I haven't been on one yet, but I gotta feel like I'm on the right path because I'm here in this room, right? To kind of circle back, it's kind of hard to put a time stamp on it.
Yep.
But I would say, when I quit touring with Josh to try to do sessions full time, I'd say there was a solid 18 months of really kind of scraping to try to make it really happen. Again, I'd been with Josh, and in the last 3 of my 5 years with Josh, I had been able to kind of get a few session accounts going. So I didn't start from zero. But when I quit Josh, I was on a salary at that point, and I certainly was not making enough money in town to recoup the salary I had just left.
Sure.
So it was definitely a financial risk, on my part. And again, just a lot of security, making that jump, right? Josh was a tangible name. His career was on an upward trajectory. It was real easy to qualify myself to people. Oh, I play guitar for Josh Turner. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Cool. Okay. Yeah, cool. Whatever. Making money and all that stuff. And so when I quit that job, again, calculated risk, and thankfully it paid off. But that first year and a half of just kind of staying at home hardcore, refusing to take another touring thing because I was just convinced I needed to be present. And then kind of like clockwork at that 18-month mark, I kind of looked up one day and my calendar was kind of happening, Yeah. I had sessions every day, and I still wasn't playing on any big records at that point, but I was, again, like we talked about, I was in those circles of people. So I quit Josh Turner in 2011. I didn't have a song on the radio, released on the radio till 2015. So so if that helps, do any math for anybody, it was 4 years of focusing on sessions solely before, I had a song actually out, that was consumable. Now, again, because of the way releases work, I'd played on those songs 18 months before that or whatever, just that kind of stuff, but it definitely was not overnight.
I relate to that completely because I actually signed my pub deal in 2011, had my first song released to radio in 2012. 15. But at that time, I had to make a decision. I was also, I mean, not to the extent you were, but I was playing in like a little blues band around town. I was doing a couple of other things for jobs, and it just, you have to make that decision. You have to take that calculated risk, or sometimes not calculated. Sometimes it's just a straight up risk to
Yeah,
get
right.
in those situations. And I love your answer to that question. I can tell you're from Nashville because it's all this humble thing of like, man, I don't know if I've ever made it. You're one of the most hired guitar players in this town. You're in sessions like all the time. You don't understand when it's happening. And I love whenever you just wake up one day and realize, man, okay, it's happening. I'm paying my bills. I'm on great sessions. I'm with great producers. It has to be an awesome feeling to know that your time that you put in was rewarded and paid off.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, there's definitely, there are those moments for pause, that luckily and happily come along, but they happen over such a slow period of time that the shock factor of it isn't there for you. I always use the analogy of someone that's lost a lot of weight, right? So if you don't see someone for 2 years and you show up and you see them and they've lost 200 pounds, you're like, whoa, man, crazy. Like that's unbelievable. Wow. It's incredible. Wow. But to that person, they've been looking at themselves in the mirror every day for 2 years and seeing it come off pound at a time, 2 pounds at a time, 3 pounds at a time, 4 pounds at a time. And so because, yeah, I can sit here and, you have to acknowledge, well, he's won Guitar Player of the Year this many times and he's played
Yeah,
on this many hits or whatever.
yeah.
But because it happens over such a long rollout, it's like, I don't feel any different than I did before I played on any number ones. I feel exactly the same. And the desire to kind of to grow and be better and progress and still the kind of in the back of my mind, like, are they liking this? Is this cool? Is this cool? Am I doing, is this, I don't think that ever leaves. To that point, I think a healthy amount of that is probably what keeps keeps me motivated to keep my game up. It's not leaning back and resting on any laurels.
Actually, most of the sessions that we've done together, I'll send you a track and you're tracking at your house, but
Yeah.
you can tell by every step of your career, from the road to in the studio to now producing, it's just like you're always reaching for something more, asking what else is next. How did you make the transition from playing on these huge records to being like, okay, now I'm going to step into a producer role?
Production was certainly not a thing. I can't say that I have the foresight of saying, all right, yeah, then I'm gonna be a session musician, then I'm gonna parlay that into producing. But along the way, I had some words of encouragement from guys that I really respected and trust that just kind of every once in a while, someone pulling me to the side and saying, hey man, you maybe don't know this yet, but you're a producer. Like, the way you lead these sessions or, whatever. And me going, oh, well, thanks. But I know, Dan Huff's a producer. I'm just helping us get this session done. That's the kind of, those are the kind of conversations I would have. But again, it kind of started for me in terms of the major label production, just artists that I had played on their records before and were looking for a change of pace for whatever reason, or a producer that I'd worked with, kind of inviting me to co-produce with them and just, acknowledging like, hey man, you bring a lot to this project and the artist is really comfortable with you and you want to just kind of share the burden and share the wealth on this and me just kind of, again, being willing to go, yeah, sure. And take a certain step back again, because it may not be the clearest to people, but in session world, we show up and we get our check every day. Well, we don't get paid every day, but we earn a wage every day for the time we spent working on that track or that record or that song or whatever. And as a producer, the money you make, it can end up really being backloaded, or even quote unquote advanced money, as you know. It sometimes can take a while to show up, and you end up working a lot of hours for the expectation of a check at some point down the road, you know. And there were definitely a few moments, you know, when I started getting into major label production where I was, you know, weeks or months down the road on a project and thinking, man, I've turned down how many sessions for people's records to be working on this. And I mean, I'm really proud of it, but man, I hope I get paid for the, you know, or this, I hope this works out. But again, I just kind of was trusting people telling me, hey, you can do this. This makes sense. You know, and we're happy with the result and this, and you know, you do one thing that's a little bit of success and your name starts popping up on certain people's radar. And then that in itself can kind of, you know, snowball. It was all kind of it all kind of happened at once, like me wanting to shift into studio work definitely went hand in hand with me buying Pro Tools. I think we were on Pro Tools maybe 7. It might have been earlier than that, you know, might have been Pro Tools 6 at that point in time. And just learning it. And I'd call that same engineer friend of mine when I had a real question. And I remember being so, I've told this story a lot too, but I remember being so pumped. I got back and I got home and I had a computer and I had this inbox and I plugged it up and I got Pro Tools installed and I opened the application, I opened it up and it's doing the thing and then it opened and nothing happened. And it, you know, Pro Tools, if anyone's ever worked in Pro Tools, you know, when you open it, it doesn't even open a session for you. It just opens and then you have to go select start new session.
Right.
And then what a metaphor for that DAW and how much I would ultimately have to learn. I was like, wow, this thing doesn't even start a session. Like I have to, okay, start new session. Okay, all right. I would say, luckily, I was an early adopter on the home recording thing, and used it as a tool to get better, to work, and to offer, you know, someone a chance. Hey, if you don't like it, don't pay me, you know, or whatever. And or still, again, doing those things. Hey, man, I'll throw guitars on it for $40. You know, send it to, you know, whatever at the time, and just as a way to get at bats, right? You know, I want to prove I can hit the ball, so I'm just looking for at bats at that point. And I've always just kind of stayed really into Pro Tools, and you know, the whole time as a guitar player was coming up in the session world, I just enjoyed, you know, learning more and more about the recording and engineering side of it and the DAW and again, it definitely got to a point where I was working with some really great engineers and then coming home and recording myself and going, okay, this is the same stuff. Why does mine not sound like it sounds when they're recording me? And then starting to ask some questions and, you know, get tips from them and come home and try it and, you know, do all that stuff.
Well, in your opinion, what is that difference between a home recorder and recording downtown Music Row?
There's big pieces of the pie and there's little pieces of the pie. Now, I definitely am a believer in the concept of, like, you know, at every stage, if you can make that stage of the chain or the process 2% better, well, okay, 2% is 2%, but if you do that 5 times, it's 10% better, right? And so if we look at it, you know, 100% is great guitar tone that you picture in your mind, you know. I think a big chunk is obviously just the, you know, without saying, the player, the hands, the gear. I am still a firm believer in real amps and cabinets. I do have a Kemper. I do have an aux box. I use them from time to time, more than from time to time. I use them both for different applications, but there is a depth that you do lose inherently in the digitizing of the ones and zeros. That's just kind of, it just is what it is. We haven't quite, in my personal humble opinion, we haven't quite got there yet. We're as close as we've ever been, but we're not quite there yet. And then mic placement is it's a huge thing. You know, great engineers get in there with the cabinet room and listen to what's coming out and place a mic in the right spot. Mic choice, mic placement, location, mic distance, on access, off access. I mean, just all those kinds of things. That's another huge chunk of the, you know, tone scale. And then the things I think when you get into slightly smaller chunks that can start to add up is in the analog to digital conversion. You know, what kind of clock are you using? What's your, you know, what are your converters? You know, I mean, that stuff does make a difference. It's maybe not as huge of a difference as just getting the right mic on there in the first place. You know, if that getting a mic in the right place on an amp that sounds great, that gets you 75% of the way there. That last 15% of it is conversion, clock sourcing, preamp and compression, and EQ. There's certain preamps that, you know, are great for certain instruments and maybe don't apply as well to electric guitar and vice versa. And that's all stuff that, you know, you just have to kind of seek that knowledge out over time. You know, for me, it was always just ask an engineer. You know, anytime I thought my guitar sounded amazing, I would go in, you know, hey, what are we doing? What are you running me through? What is it? You know, oh, well, it's, you know, and some days you would get the answer is, well, man, it's just a 57 going through this Neve pre. That's all I'm doing. And you go, okay, well, that's heartening, right? Like that makes me feel good because that means the sound coming out is pretty good.
Yep.
And then there's days when it's like, well, I got two mics and I'm blending them over here and they're both running through this, and then I've got it going through compression, and that sounds great too. They're different, but that sounds great too. So there's not a right or wrong way to record, you know, guitars. That being said, I think for me, the moral of the story is every link in the signal chain has to be intentional and as good as you can get it. You know, if that's a 57 straight in, you know, you can make sure that, you know, you're using good cable and that the 57 is not broken, and, you know, use a decent pre and do what you can there. And if that's two mics with a blend through two pre's and two compressors, well, that's great there, but you'd be better off with the 57 direct than the two mics through two crappy pre's and two crappy compressors running through the thing. You know what I mean?
It took me a while to understand that because, you know, the quality of one mic in the right placement definitely goes a lot further than having two mics in an odd or out of phase. So do you find
absolutely, yeah, out of phase is a huge problem.
Do you find yourself micing your cab with like one away and then one on the cone, or is it just most of the time a 57 a little off the cone, or what's your?
Man, I went through years and years of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and the way my setup is right now, I just have I've got a 57 straight up, not off access, pointed directly. It's about 2 fingers away from the grill cloth and just to the outside of the cone.
Okay.
And then I use a large diaphragm mic as a room mic to blend in, which is easy phase wise because they're so far apart. I don't have to run the risk of things being out of phase with that. And that's way more so for like a real effect. If I just kind of really want to throw the room mic in there for something drastic, I do that. But I'd say 98% of the guitar tones that I use now at the house is a 57. 57 through a Neve, 1073 preamp through a 1176 compressor.
There you go.
That's my electric guitar chain.
There you go. That makes me feel good. That's kind of the digital way that I try to do it with the UAD stuff. But man, yeah, you can't beat that. What do you feel like amp wise are your standouts or the things that you can't live without? I mean, the last amp that you're giving up, what would that be?
I've always said that, you know, I'm not an artist. I'm a sideman, you know, or you know, producer or whatever. But the point is I haven't, I believe that part of my job is to be a little bit of a chameleon and to serve, you know, what we're working on. And so I'm always very conscious of trying to not be the wrong guy in the band and that kind of thing. And so, you know, over time, I certainly have found little magic combinations of, man, this guitar sounds really great through that amp. I've always noticed that every time. That's a winning combination. But in terms of desert island guitar or amp, That's a hard one for me to nail down, because my question would be like, well, what kind of music do I want to play on the island? Because, you know, I can point to guitar tones that I'm proud of, and say, yeah, this was this amp and this guitar and this cabinet and this mic or whatever. But I'm only proud of it because of the context it serves within that song. So, I have lots of amps, and lots of guitars, and I switch a lot. And that's just because I'm always just kind of looking for, what does this need? Does it need a little more sparkle? Does it need a little more Does it need to, does it need to be a big sound, or does it need to be a compact kind of focused thing? And I'm always thinking at it like that when I pick what would the guy in this band play, and that's the question I ask myself a lot, and then that's how I choose that stuff. So, it's hard to kind of pick one.
Well, and the importance of separating tones and on your productions, do you like choose two different guitars? Do you use two different amps? Like, say if you're doing the same part, doubling the part, is it important to you to change up, maybe switch the pickup? Like, how do you make it stand out in that way?
Again, not to be evasive, but there's cause and time for both of those,
Yeah.
right? There are instances, 'cause it's all about the end result, you're trying to achieve. And I could definitely point to instances of guitars where it's a straight up double. I didn't change anything at all. I play the left side, I pull up another side, I play the exact same side, I do that. And then there's parts where, yeah, it's a double, but because of the way I want this to sit in the mix, I'm going to make sure that tonally this one's a little bit brighter. So the part is an exact double, but this one sits forward a little bit more, and this one sits backwards a little bit more. And then there's times when you just go, no, this needs to sound like two guys. This needs to sound like John and George, or Malcolm and Angus, or whatever. And in those instances, that's a lot of times that's, you just a complete start. It's like, okay, well, this guy's a Les Paul through a matchless, this guy's a Telly through a Fender, or whatever. And so again, to me, that question is so based on the context of the song, I'm working on.
Yeah, man. Well, in your own opinion, the biggest influence, or who would be the biggest influence on your guitar playing? Or it could be, a band or whatever. Just what really made you want to learn and made you want to just stay at it,
Two-part answer. Funny enough, I've never been drawn to like guitar music. So, a lot of people find their way to guitar through, guitar heroes. They find their way through the Stevie Ray Vaughns of the world, or the Derek Truxes, who, by the way, I think is the greatest living guitar player alive. But for me, early on, I didn't resonate to that kind of music. I reacted to songs and bands and riffs, not the guitar hero stuff. Yeah. That being said, when I put that hat on and said, okay, I'm going to start trying to make a living playing guitar, I need to learn these records. Dan Huff and Brent Mason, definitely, I started seeing the names over and over and going, wait a minute, this is him again? Okay, wait, oh, that's him too? Okay, that's this guy. Oh, that's, okay. Wow, they're both on this record, or whatever. And I would say I definitely, was inspired by, just the level of artistry and, the confidence and the way they played. And then also, again, just their ability to kind of shift on a dime, musically from record to record, and there's certainly things, particularly with Brent, people definitely associate him with certain style of guitar playing, and that's understandable. But man, that guy's deep. And, there were definitely times when I thought I could name every, I thought I could always pick any guitar player out of the speakers. Oh, that's Kenny Greenberg. That's Tom. That's Boog. That's, whoever. And Brent definitely, surprised me on more than one occasion of being like, wow, that's him. Yeah, that's, awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
So didn't know he had that gear, so those two guys for sure, Dan and Brent, definitely inspired me to be, session man for sure.
I'm convinced, man, there's a lot of people that are listening to this interview. Maybe they're sitting in their hometown wanting to do what you've done. You're going to inspire them the same way. They're looking up these credits. They see your name everywhere. So the same way you talk about these guys, people are going to be talking about you, dude. I just know. And so to those people, what would you say? Like, I mean, that want to do and achieve this, that have no clue, no idea what it takes or where to start. They just know that they're obsessed with a guitar, and they're putting in all these hours, they're putting in the 10,000 hours to say, one day I moved to Nashville. What would you say to them?
Well, first I'd say, must be present to win. Anytime I talk to people that reach out that are considering the move, I'm thinking about moving to Nashville. Well, just come on, like quit thinking about it. If you want to, it's kind of like if you want to play in the NFL, you got to go to a city where there's an NFL team, and that's kind of the thing. So if you want to do this, you got to be here. That's just first and foremost. And then if you want to be a session musician, I think the biggest thing you have to understand is it's a service industry. You're ultimately there to help someone else achieve their goal musically, right? This isn't a job for you to scratch your itch, or don't become a session musician if you just, want a band to solo over, you're in for a rude awakening there. But yeah, it's definitely a niche market of music, and a subgenre of musicians that understand that we're all there to help this person realize their vision, and whatever that looks like. It's about being a team player, and yeah, every once in a while they throw you a fastball and they go, hey man, I'm gonna throw you a fastball, just knock this out of the park. And that's fun, but those moments are great, but you're there to clock in and help them get their vision out, recorded onto the medium, and you're not there to make your album, and so I would just say, if you want to be here and do that, first off, know that that's the job you're getting into, and put yourself in a position to speak knowledgeably when they ask your opinion. If they say, well, man, I want it to be like this, or I want it to be like this, and you don't know, or that's not in your library, like, just be honest about it. Go, man, I'm not familiar with that. Like, can I listen to that for a second, or could you play me some of that? And then, oh, okay. And go from there, because the biggest mistake I see young musicians in the session world make is that they're eager to prove themselves, and then that translates into them not taking direction well, because they think that if someone has any notes for them or wants them to change anything at all, that they're being attacked. And that's just not, that's not the case. And I can relate, because I remember having similar instincts. But it's a service industry, man. You're there to make them happy. If you don't make them happy, it's not a good day, because you're not going to get called back. So
I hope you guys that are listening to this are hearing this out. This is just some gold information. This is the second. I haven't done, I guess, about 5, 6, 7 interviews right now, which is not a lot. And you're the second session musician that has told me that same story about just going in there and acting like you got it together and assuming that you're just going to plow through it, instead of just taking a minute, asking the person that you're working for, preferring the other person. Hey, that goes so far. It shows that you care, and that you're not just going to go in there and do your own thing and waste the time and the money of everybody else that's there. Because, I mean, that can be a stressful time when you're trying to get a record done and you're not willing to at least hear the direction of what's going on.
You take the problems and the critiques and you solve them for what they are. I use food analogies a lot, and it's, if someone hired you to be a chef and you ask them a few questions about their meal, and I'm going to go make you a meal. And they're like, yeah, well, just And all they say is, yeah, man, just, I don't like fish, just FYI. And you're like, okay, great, great. And you go and you make them a meal and you come back out and it's chicken tacos. And they go, oh, I probably should have said something. I think I just really want something like red meat. Could you do steak tacos? Well, they're not saying you're a terrible cook, you don't deserve to be here. They're not trying to embarrass you. You just maybe didn't have all the information, or you misinterpreted the information. What you should do is go, oh, cool. Well, if we're good on time, that's no problem. I'll go back and make you some steak tacos, and you do that. And it's the same musically. You can't take, some of those things. The goal is not for them to not have any input. If you want to walk into a session and play whatever you want and not have anybody the whole time go, hey man, could you change? Or hey, would you mind? Hey, that's good. But if you want to go in and play sessions and have them just say nothing but awesome, I love it, again, you're in for a surprise, because those moments are few and far between.
Well, I mean, it really comes down to going the extra mile, really taking the time to listen, doing more than you're asked for, putting in the hours, and believing that whenever you have that gut feeling of I can do this, I should move to the next level, and to not hesitate and just act on that. That's kind of the overview of what I've kind of been hearing, and I love it.
Yeah, thank you, buddy. Have a good day.